This week's Parsha is Parshas Devarim. Right at the beginning of Parshas Devarim, Moshe starts to rebuke the Jewish people. And he lists to them all the places that they angered God, where they sinned. And interestingly, the last item on the list is Di Zav. Di Zav is a reference to the sin with the golden calf. If you recall, Moshe went up to Mount Sinai and stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights. The Jewish people miscalculated how long it took he should have come down, on what day he should have come down on, and when he didn't come down on the day that they had calculated, at the time that they had calculated that he should, they assumed that he had expired, he was no longer alive, and therefore they had to find a new leader, someone else to be the person who controls them, who leads them in the desert, and they decided to construct the golden calf. Of course, after the golden calf was constructed, what it developed into was idol worship. So the question is like this: the golden calf was not the last sin that they committed in the desert. It was actually one of the first. So Moshe lists the different places that the Jewish people sinned in the desert. Why does he refer to the golden calf last? Why is the golden calf last? It should be in chronological order. Since the golden calf was one of the first sins, it should be listed as one of the first. So the Shem Yishmuel says that the golden calf sin was a sin which could be viewed as totally accidental. The Kuzari says that the golden calf, the Jewish people sitting at the golden calf, was like a person who enters a house of idol worship, but he thought it was a house of worship for God. He thought it was a synagogue. That's how the Jewish people viewed the golden calf, even though that was, of course, misconstrued. But they thought that the golden calf was a means to serve God. But in effect, what happened in the end was that it was actually idol worship. What it developed into was idol worship. So why did the golden calf last? So the main sin of the golden calf, why it was so prominent on the Jewish people's track record, was because it stemmed from not being careful with what they were doing. They didn't sit down and think about it. On the spur of the moment, they decided to go and to construct the golden calf. And because of that, that itself brought out that small tinge in their heart of love of idol worship. Meaning that if they would have sat down and thought about it, okay, what are we going to do? Moshe Rabbeinu just died. We have to figure out what we're going to do from now on. And they would have had a council and committees and whatever, and they would decide, and they would have never done this. The issue was that they were trying to do everything quickly. They did it impulsively. If you look at the language revolving around the sin of the golden calf, you'll see many times the Medrash and other commentators constantly use the word maher, which means in a hurry. The Jewish people did things in a hurry. Because of that, they made a mistake. So the Shem Yishmuel says that the reason why Di Zahav, the reference to the golden calf, is the last item on the bucket list of Moshe's rebuke is because the golden calf was the sin which was the least apparent. But from the culmination of all the sins that came after the golden calf, it was clear that that was just the start. That was the snowball effect, which at that time didn't seem so severe, but eventually they saw how severe that tendency was in the end. So Moshe left Di Zahav, which was the reference to the golden calf, to the last item, because after they would think about all of the sins that they had committed explicitly in the desert, they would realize the severity of the golden calf. One last question. On this week's parsha, it says that how do we know that Torah will cure a man's tongue? If a person has trouble speaking, that it can cure your trouble speaking. We know that from Moshe, because Moshe, it says, he was an oral sifosayim. He was a person who had trouble speaking. Nonetheless, it says in the beginning of this week's parsha, Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words that Moshe spoke. Moshe had a clear articulation, even though before he started learning Torah, he did not. The question is that our commentators say that Moshe was on such a high level of prophecy that it was as if God spoke from his throat. He was almost like a conduit, just an electrical current from God to speak through. Well, if that was the case, then why do we say that we see from the fact that Moshe could articulate that it must be that Torah cures one's speech impediment? Well, it wasn't him speaking, it was God using Moshe's vocal cords. Have a good Shabbos.